Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Mini Clinics with Mitch. My name is Mitch Braley. I'm a member of Racquetball Canada's National Development Team, coming to you from my basement on behalf of Racquetball Canada. The last few weeks, we've talked about some different muscle groups and a lot of different exercises that you can do to stay in shape and keep your fitness in check while gyms and courts remain closed across the country. I wanted to change gears a little bit this week and talk about some of the common mistakes that I see on the racquetball court, all the way from the novice level up to a fairly high level, open level of play. And some of these you might be aware of yourself. Maybe you're not necessarily aware that you're making them within your own game, and some of these might be new to you altogether. So I encourage you to reflect in your game, take some notes as we go through this, and then identify the mistakes that you're making and seek to eliminate them out of your game once you're able to return to courts and play again safely. And before we begin, I want to get started right away. I strongly encourage you to grab a pen and a sheet of paper or notepad. And as we go through each mistake one by one, make a note if you think it applies to you. And that way you're going to be a little bit more aware of it when it's happening during a game, whenever you're able to get back to the courts. And being aware of it is the first step towards being able to eliminate it from your game altogether. So the first thing I want to look at, and I think this is probably the most common mistake of everything else we're going to talk about today, is proper center court positioning. I have two diagrams here. I have number one, where center court is marked as being between the receiving line and between the short line. And then diagram number two, where center court is marked as being about 1.5 feet, 2 feet behind the receiving line. So think about two things here. Number one, where do you believe is the proper center court position? Is it number one or is it number two? And B, think about where you typically find yourself standing when you're ready to return your opponent's shot. Pause the video if you want to think about it, but the correct answer is number two. So about 1.5 feet, 2 feet behind the receiving line. The reason we don't want to be this far up in the court is it becomes far too easy to beat us on passing shots. And it doesn't even need to be a high quality passing shot. If it's halfway decent with moderate power, it's either going to get by and beat us completely, or we're going to be returning it with a defensive shot. The ball moves too fast in racquetball that if you're this far up, the ball will beat you and get by you too quickly. Another reason, even if you look at high-level pro matches where they're standing here, is the ball ends up in the backcourt a lot, whether it's quality passing shots, wide angles, wraparounds, ceiling balls, balls coming off the back wall, but a large percentage of shots that are being hit are going to end up in the backcourt. So if you're this far up, like in diagram one, now you need to take more steps to get back, and moving backwards is typically more difficult than moving forwards. So you're introducing unnecessary, difficult movement into your game. And the thing that makes racquetball unique as opposed to other racket sports like tennis or badminton, squash, is the ability to hit the outright winner, the kill shot. And a lot of people, myself included, worry too much about covering the kill shot, or the really low shots, or the splats, or the pinches that our opponents are hitting. And the thing we need to remember is if it's a perfect kill shot, it doesn't matter how far up in the court we are, we could be touching the front wall with our racket. A good kill shot will have bounced twice before we can return it. It doesn't matter where we're standing. We just have to accept that our opponents will kill the ball. Now, if they're killing the ball a lot, there's probably another issue at play. You're probably setting them up too much or making it too easy for them to hit quality shots. So play the percentages, don't keep being on passes, and make sure you're staying back and not playing up too far forward. Another really common mistake I see is people trying to be sneaky with their serves. And this is more so at the lower level of play. When you get to the higher levels and you have players with really good, really developed drive serves, you really don't know where they're going, and they are deceptive in terms of, are they going to be hitting a drive serve to the left side, to the right side, a wraparound? The movement looks the same. But what I'm referring to is situations that are a little bit more obvious. So I've seen players go up and make it look like they're going to hit a lob serve to the left side, something they've been hitting all game or all match, and then at the last minute, they drop the ball really quickly and snap their wrist and try and hit a drive serve to the right side of the court, and then trying to trick their opponent. And most of the time, the only person you're going to fool with that is yourself. And 99 times out of 100, execution is going to trump deception. Sure, there's times that you want to be tricky or keep your opponent off balance or deceive them, but by focusing on hitting the absolute best serve you possibly can every single time you're in the box, you're going to be much more effective. And often when you're trying to be sneaky, it makes the serve weaker and it negates any sort of deception that you were hoping to achieve in the first place. So you're hitting a weaker serve. So pick a serve, know what you want to do with the serve, and hit the absolute best serve possible. And you're going to see much better results and much weaker returns as opposed to trying to trick your opponent. Eliminating low percentage shots is a great way to improve your level of play. And when I talk about low percentage shots, I don't mean, hey, you're set up and you're trying to kill the ball and roll it out. I don't consider that low percentage. What I'm more so talking about is some of the fancier shots when you're on the run and instead of going to the ceiling, you're hitting a pass or wide angle, you're trying to hit some fancy kill or splat, or you're in the backcourt and you're trying to hit an overhead reverse pinch or kill shot from above your head from 38, 39 feet. And the problem is people remember the ones that they make, and it's usually just 1 or 2 times out of 10. But you remember the good feeling associated with it and how sweet it feels to make those shots. And the other 8 or 9 that you miss, you just sort of clump them together with all the other standard shots that you miss. So you convince yourself that your percentages are much higher than they actually are. And you reinforce it and you keep going for it when it's actually a losing recipe. So be really aware of the percentage of times you're actually executing these shots for winners and winning the rallies when you try them. And I totally agree that there's an element of creativity and risk taking that takes place in racquetball. That's what makes it so fun. So I'm not trying to say only hit boring, high percentage shots and kill the ball when you're perfectly set up. That's not the message I'm trying to get across here. I mean, more so if you're going to go for these types of shots, these risky shots, I have the picture of Federer hitting this um, between the legs tweener, as they call it, in a U.S. Open Grand Slam match, which is a huge moment. Um, but when they talked to him, he said that this was something that he worked on and tried in practice. So he knew that he was capable of doing it. And if you look at Kane, who's probably the best player in history at hitting shots between his legs and behind his back and all sorts of other fancy, funky positions and angles, it's because he's worked on those in practice. So it's not as low a percentage of a shot as we think it is because he's practiced it and he knows he can do it. Now, for us, it is a lower percentage shot. So there's going to be times when you don't have a choice and you have to hit it because it's a fast moving game and you can't always get into the proper position. But if you can play safe, look at your odds, and only hit these shots when you're okay to miss them, you're going to see your level of play rise significantly and you're going to win more rallies and win more matches and games as a result. This here is one that really interests me, and it is trying to distinguish if struggles that you're having in more so in tournaments and competition can be attributed to mental issues or more so physical and skill-based issues. And my mindset, my opinion is if you can't execute a particular shot or serve in practice, then you won't be able to execute in a tournament. So the physical skills need to be developed before you blame poor results on mental issues. So as the example I have here, say you're constantly leaving your forehand down the line pass up off the back wall in a game in a tournament and it costs you the match. And you say, oh, you know what, I uh, do it all the time in practice and when I'm playing drop-in games with people and practice games and I get into a tournament and then all of a sudden I'm missing this shot and I'm losing because of it. But if you really take a close look, the chances are that if you're trying to do that shot in practice, unless you're doing it 7 or more times out of 10, give or take, as a solid percentage, it's probably not a mental issue, but a skill issue. If you can only execute that shot 4 or 5 times in practice, that percentage is going to lower when you're in a game anyways, because it's not a perfect practice scenario with a setup and a simple feed. It's a fast moving, chaotic rally, chaotic game. So you need to be sure that if there's a skill that you think you're not doing in a tournament and is costing you these matches, that it's something that you can do in practice. And you need to have that base before you start looking at mental issues. So make sure you can rule that out. Know that you've put in the work. Know that you can execute the serves, execute the shots, execute the footwork. And then once you are 100% confident in that ability and know full well what your numbers are, then you can start looking at some of the mental issues that might be posing an issue and becoming an obstacle for you. Another one I see a lot is this idea of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you're in a match or a game and you found a serve or you found a shot or a game style that's working against your opponent and you're winning and they're struggling, there's no need to change until they adjust. Sometimes mixing it up isn't always the answer. I know, especially growing up as a junior, you're always here, get in the service box and mix up your serves and mix up your shots and make sure they are off balance and your opponents can't get a read on what you're doing. And that typically is good advice, but a lot of players from the novice up until the open level do have holes in their game that you can exploit. So if you do find that, say, a high lob to their forehand is working and they can't return it effectively and you're winning, then keep hitting that lob. Don't stop. There's no reason to switch just for the sake of switching. If you look at the analogy of a baseball pitcher, if they're throwing a slider, 85-mile-an-hour slider at a particular batter, and they know that they're never going to hit it or make good contact, then why on earth would they ever decide I'm going to change it up and throw a fastball? They're going to throw that slider every single time because they know it is effective. Now, the one exception to this would be if you're in practice or working on something, then sure, by all means, change it up, work on some different serves. But if you're in a competition setting and you want to win that match and you found something that is working, do not change until your opponent does something that starts to make you uncomfortable, whether they improve their return or improve the shots that you're now seeing from them. Now, this one applies more so to being in either solo practices or practice games versus a tournament, but um, don't let yourself off the hook. What I mean by that is if you're playing against somebody and you win the rally on one of your shots, really take a good hard look and say, did I win the rally because that was a good shot or did my opponent make a mistake? So if I'm aiming for a down the line pass and I accidentally hit a splat and I killed that splat, great, I won the rally, but I didn't hit the ball where I wanted to and I missed my shot by quite a bit. My opponent will never know, but you need to know and realize that you missed the shot you were going for and something needs to be corrected. So just because you're winning rallies off particular shots, it could be an opponent weakness. It could be because you're playing a lower level of player, but the players that are at your skill level or that you want to start beating that are above you would be returning it effectively. So take a close look at the shots you're hitting, where they're ending up, where the bounces are, and ask yourself, did I execute exactly how I wanted to? If not, why? Or if I did and the opponent still got it, was it the right shot? Did I not hit it quite as good as it needed to be? So always just be looking back and analyzing the rallies that you've won and that you've lost, but it's easier to look back at what you've lost and critique it. It's a lot harder to look at the rallies that you're winning and realize that you still could have done something wrong. Another really interesting misconception that I see a lot of is the idea that you need to contact the ball super, super low in order to hit kill shots and really low shots. And although it seems counterintuitive, that simply isn't the case. The ideal sweet spot when we're talking about height for contact point is between the knee and the hip. So you can even see here I have this freeze frame of a backhand, if you will, and my contact point for the ball would be somewhere in this area of the racket. If you look, that is just about right in line with where my knee is, which is a really good spot. And if I wanted to contact the ball lower, so we're talking somewhere down here, I have to bend this front leg more, and this back leg is going to have to bend even more than it already is. So right now it's at a nice 90 degree. It's going to bend and be touching the floor. And it's just really inefficient. It's going to be hard on the legs. It's going to burn them out. And it's tough to get into that position and do that swing every single time in a game. And I'm going to be able to kill the ball hitting it at this height. And if you take a close look at where you're contacting it yourself, and next time we'll get to the courts and possibly take some video of yourself, which I highly, highly recommend, you're going to notice that you're contacting the ball a lot higher than you think you are, but still producing a kill shot. And you can see on my forehand here in the bottom too, my contact point might be a little bit low. The camera angle really isn't helping because it's sort of looking up, but I'd be contacting it somewhere in here, and that is just below my knee. I wouldn't want to be too much lower than this. Probably come up a little bit higher, but I'm still going to produce a good shot here. And take a look on YouTube too and find some pro matches. If you can use some frame by frame analysis, there's some slow-mo videos of some pros. I think Kane has a few that are on there, and take a close look at where they are contacting the ball and where the ball is ending up on the front wall. And that isn't to say that you're not going to be contacting the ball low during matches or during games, because sometimes the ball is low and you don't have a choice to contact anywhere else. It's not going to come up anymore. So if your opponents hit a low shot, you are going to have to hit low and strike it there. But when you have the time to set up and swing, ideally between the knee and the hip is where you want to look to be. And of course, as we all know, you don't want to be any higher than that hip, because when you're swinging high like that, then you're just going to be hitting shots that are coming off the back wall and really aren't great quality. Or if you're hitting high and swinging downwards, you're either going to skip the ball or you're going to hit the front wall, and based on the trajectory, the ball is going to pop back out high. It's not just going to hit a nice flat kill. So keep it between the knee and the hips and take a close look at where you're hitting it next time you're able to get back in the court. Another really big one here is players going into matches without a game plan. And as I see it, game plans should never be complex or difficult. They should always be basic, and they should always be simple, all the way from the beginner level to the pro level, at pro stops and world championships. And keep it simple. And the first thing you want to look at is what your game style is and what your strengths are. So this would go back to the first mini clinics with Mitch episode where we talked about strengths and weaknesses. So you really have to know your game style inside and out before you look at anything else, because that's the most important thing. For example, if you're a power player, so you like to drive serve on the first serve, hit a lot of really powerful passing shots and wide angles, and don't really like a slow pace of play. Now let's say you're going in against an opponent that you know is weak against lob serves and weak against that slow pace of play. Well, you don't want to change your game style from the power to this more softer control game just because you know your opponent's weak against it, because now you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone and you're not playing to your strengths. So always play to your strengths and know what those are going to be. Then you can worry about your opponent's weaknesses and try and pick them apart after that. I think it's really important to know what serves you're going to hit, and you don't need a list of 10 serves that you're going to hit throughout the match, but have 2 or 3 that you know that you can hit effectively, that you're strong in. Even better if you know the opponent and know what serves they're weak at returning. Great, try and throw those in if they're serves that you can hit well. Again, if your opponent's really weak at returning a nick lob to their backhand, but you don't have a good nick lob to the backhand side, you either have to practice that and get good at it beforehand, or there's no reason to hit it in the match because you're going to hit a poor serve and they're probably going to return it effectively. Now it's good idea to sequence serves. So going in and saying my first 5 serves are going to be 2 straight drive serves to the left, 1 to the right, a Z serve, and then a wrap, just to let them know that you can mix things up and have a different variety of serves. So I think sequences of serves are a great idea to have. And if you do know some areas of weakness on the opponent, say, hey, I know if I hit a backhand, or excuse me, if I hit a ceiling ball to their backhand, they're typically going to hit a weak shot, then by all means focus on hitting that shot. But have a couple shots in mind, a couple serves in mind, but you don't want to get overly complicated in terms of trying to orchestrate and sequence out all sorts of different complicated rallies and shots together, because the game's simply too fast. It's just not going to work, and you're not going to be able to implement that effectively. And as always, a really brief recap of what we talked about today. Number 1, center court is further back than you typically think, so make sure you're about 1.5 feet, 2 feet behind the receiving line, and stop getting beat on easy pass shots. Number 2, the person you fool the most when you're trying to be sneaky or tricky with your serves is most often yourself. So choose a serve you want to hit and hit it, execute it as best as you possibly can every single time. Be mindful of low percentage shots. There's a reason that they're low percentage, And if you're only hitting 1 or 2 out of 10 and missing the rest, then that is not a recipe for success. And if you are missing other shots often, more so in tournament or competition scenarios, don't always blame it on being a mental issue. So look back and ask yourself, can you perform this particular skill in practice consistently? If the answer is no, then the reason you can't do it in a tournament or a game isn't a mental issue, but rather a skill-based or a physical one. So make sure that you're able to do something well before you start looking for reasons why you're having trouble doing it in a bunch of different scenarios. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you have found something that works, whether it's a serve or a shot or a particular game style that is winning you a match against an opponent, do not change until they prove to you that they can adjust and handle whatever it is you're throwing at them. Don't let yourself off the hook. It's easy to analyze rallies that we lose and critique the weak points. Usually it's because we missed a shot or skipped a ball we shouldn't have, whatever the case is, but do the same thing when you're winning rallies. Did you win a rally because you hit a good shot and you hit the ball where you wanted to? Or did you win the rally because your opponent was in a poor position or they made a mistake themselves? And being able to analyze that side of the equation is going to help you improve a lot quicker. Make sure you're watching your contact point. To kill the ball, you don't have to contact the ball really low below your shin and around the ankle. Between the knee and the hip, as long as you're in a good bent athletic stance, is right where you want to be contacting the ball. And have a game plan, but a simple game plan. You don't want anything overcomplicated. Even at the high open and pro level, game plans are simple. Pick a couple of serves and a couple of shots that you think are going to be effective, whether they're a strength of yours or something that you know the opponent is weak against, and then go in planning to use those shots and those serves or whatever that game style is that you've come up with. That's all I have for today, though. Thanks so much for checking in. My name is Mitch Bradley on behalf of Racquetball Canada. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe and take care.